Hello and welcome to our final web chat of our 5 short conversations to support Mental Health Awareness Week and month. Specifically, we're exploring mental health well-being in the workplace. I'm Erica Burke, owner of the HR department Solihull, an outsourced HR services provider to local SMEs, and I'm with Asha Berzon, owner of Mindability, who helps small businesses to improve emotional well-being through training and therapy. Now, the subject of mental health has been explored quite a bit, and today we're talking about boundaries, which again has been covered quite a lot. But some of the things that we have spoken about so far this week are those less well-travelled aspects of mental well-being, and they are domestic abuse, trauma, parental carers burnout, and alcohol misuse. So as we're going to focus on boundaries today, we thought we'd revisit it, particularly in light of the fact that a lot of employees are returning to work and employers are thinking about hybrid working. So let's begin. Asha, tell me, why are boundaries so important?
I think boundaries are actually essential to our well-being and personal safety. And quite often what can happen is they can be confused as a mechanism or a tool for keeping people out. But actually, if we changed our view of it, it actually enables us to protect ourselves and protect our energy, and it enhances our self-esteem. And we know that boundaries change, over a lifetime, depending on what our experiences are, our moral reasoning, our family dynamics, the way that our personality develops as well. So we're inevitably all going to also hold different boundaries.
Okay, so how do you think working from home has actually changed our boundaries, or has it?
I think it has actually. I think last March there was a frantic effort made by employers to provide work phones and laptops and all these devices to support staff to be able to work from home. This flexibility has meant a number of things. Businesses didn't necessarily have to shut. People didn't lose their livelihoods, and obviously these are real positive things. And actually what we found was that some employees found it was much more, they were able to function more efficiently because it offered them the opportunity to structure work around their life, whether that was their location, the times that they were working, and how they scheduled things. But I think, unfortunately, what we also know is that the research has shown it has also had a negative impact for some people. And so that distinction between work and home has become less obvious because we've had this increased accessibility. And so a recent study found that something like 75% of parents were struggling to find time for their partner and children. And it's also evident from analysis that women in particular held the caregiving responsibilities across the generations. And I know we talked about that when we were talking about parental and carers responsibility. But what this accessibility has done has meant that in addition to our working hour, we're actually working an additional 3 hours per day as we struggle to sort of disconnect our real world from that digital one.
But isn't the inability to connect or disconnect from the digital world, that isn't just sort of to do with employers though, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, if you think about it, we've gone from being in work, being in a real setting, associating, talking to our colleagues, to now having to do all our meetings via Zoom, being on the phone, emailing. But if you imagine, if you're waiting for a very important email, it's more accessible to you, and so you may choose to then pick it up and look at it. But equally, then you might be on Facebook, you might be on Insta, you might be on other social media platforms, but personal ones. And so there's this real kind of digital world potentially taking over the world that we live in.
Yeah, no, I can certainly sympathise, and I get that one. But do you think that's more a case of flexibility rather than boundaries?
So I think the flexibility that working from home has given us is absolutely, like I said, been absolutely essential and critical. But flexibility shouldn't compromise our boundaries. But if anything, it raises the question, how effective are those boundaries? because what they can do, if you've got good, healthy boundaries in place that you respect and those around you respect, then it can help to reduce that conflict, and it prevents physical and mental health difficulties going forward. And I know we're going to be talking about this in a short while, but we know it retains staff, we know it improves productivity, simply because we then have the energy to work when we're supposed to work. But it allows us to manage our responsibilities and do them effectively. It manages us to enhance our relationships, it improves our confidence and well-being. And I think the big one for me is it helps us to define how we wish to be treated. You know, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And sort of just following on from that, do you think that staff get an opportunity to influence boundaries at work?
To be honest, I personally, I don't think people think about it a great deal.
Yeah.
You know, as an employee, you know, employees are generally pretty compliant, and they go with the flow of the organisational culture. And if it doesn't suit them, they leave for whatever reason. And there's sometimes a sense in companies, and I've, you know, been part of that says, look, this is the way that things are done here. Yeah. And that doesn't really brook any argument. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, people just get on with it. Yeah. And, you know, in the last year, people have felt much more insecure, perhaps, than they might otherwise have done. So that they've probably been more compliant than ever and just thought, you know what, you know, it's a pandemic, it's a completely different situation. I'll just go with the flow. I'll do whatever needs to do. I'll work whatever hours I need to do to get on with it.
Yeah, and I guess in that situation, particularly if, you know, the company are talking about reorganizing, restructuring and all of that. So what kind of examples might come to mind?
Well, things like, you know, bosses working longer hours. So if your boss, you know, your boss comes in early, you know, they work long hours, they're proud of that fact. There's a tendency for people to try and mirror that because they think that by not doing that, it puts them in a bad light.
Yeah.
You know, and when you kind of are there all the time, the sort of the word for that is presenteeism. Doesn't mean you're being any more productive, but you're visible. If you're in the office, you're visible. If you're working at home, you might be sending emails. You might send them during the early hours. I mean, I know somebody once who said to me that they got up specifically, this is crazy, but got up specifically at 5 o'clock in the morning to start sending emails to give the message that they were working. They weren't. They were just checked in on their emails, sent a few, and felt really proud of themselves because it meant that they were thinking about work and they thought that was a really good thing.
Yeah.
But then you've also got the situation where people are scared to go off sick. So if they're unwell, they don't want to be seen to be unwell. So they tend to take annual leave instead. Yeah. We call this sort of leaveism.
Yeah.
You know, there's an ism for everything.
Yeah.
Now I've seen that happen quite often actually with a lot of people in management type roles.
Yes.
They're worried about being vulnerable. And they think it might have an impact on their career prospects. So actually what they say is, you know, I'm not feeling very well, I'll work from home, or they'll take leave. They don't want to declare that they're actually ill. And interestingly, the CIP did a recent study with Simply Health. And, you know, this idea of presenteeism and leaveism was pretty much widespread. And employees are feeling that they really just cannot switch off. Yeah. And obviously all the remote working that you talked about earlier hasn't helped.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really strange you talk about middle managers because that's when I experienced my burnout. And I remember feeling like I don't feel like I'm in a great space, but I've got to keep going and I just got to keep pushing through and I'll be okay. It's just a temporary thing. So I absolutely hear that. And I even also remember being on leave, but thinking about and making lists about all the stuff I needed to do when I got back into work. So even though I was technically on leave on holiday, I was still thinking about the things I needed to do. So this obviously seems to be a common issue. So how are companies addressing this from your experience?
Well, again, mixed bag. And, you know, I'll refer back to, again, the sort of the CIPD, and it's a very recent report. And they were saying that 2/5 of organisations who were experiencing presenteeism and leavism took no action at all. Now, again, personally, I think there's probably a lot of business owners and managers who don't see these issues necessarily as a negative.
Yeah.
You know, it might be an old school way of thinking, that you've got to be tough, you've got to carry on.
Yeah.
You know, sickness is for wimps.
Yeah.
You know, being vulnerable is for wimps. Yeah. So if people put the hours in, they're thinking that is a plus. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Not really thinking that actually that could come back to bite them in the bum.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I think people are starting to and have more, you know, in recent years, employers have started to take it a bit more seriously, because, you know, what they don't realise is that when staff are exhausted and they burn out, that's when they make mistakes. You know, and actually, if people, you know, either are making a lot of mistakes or are going off sick with stress because they're so exhausted, they've completely disengaged from the company, that skill and expertise has gone. And it's actually quite a huge loss. Yeah. Now, the manager may not see that as a loss because that manager may be far removed from actually the whole company bottom line.
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't see it. They just recruit the next one. But actually that can cost billions when you look at it across the entire workforce. And it's such a waste, absolutely such a waste.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you've talked about presenteeism and leavism in that sense, because you're absolutely right. The bums on seats principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if there's somebody here doing the job, then that's better than nothing. And that's not the way that the world operates anymore, you know.
Warm body syndrome.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Is that what it's called? You know, and that's the thing, you know, from when we used to, well, I wasn't obviously working in my 80s, but in the 80s, not in my 80s, in the 80s, you know, when you see these kind of crazy movies where people are working from 6 in the morning till, you know, 9, 10 o'clock at night, because that's how it is, and you've got to be there and all this stuff. We're not in that space anymore. It's so different. And I think it's really interesting that you were talking about what the impact is, the losses. But before people leave, what do you think happens when there are no boundaries in the workplace? What does that look like?
Well, you get things like, you know, you've got miscommunication, because no boundaries have been set. People have, you know, I might be thinking I'm doing okay. Yes. The manager might be thinking, actually, do you know what? That person is just not delivering.
Yeah.
You know, you get misunderstanding, you get conflict, you get resentment. That's often a big one when people moan about their bosses. Yeah. You know, quite often they're moaning about, they made me stay late, I had to do this, I had to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and as that wears on, you've got, you know, declines in productivity. So people are fed up now, they're not as engaged, and they start to either make mistakes or they don't do as much.
Yeah.
You know, you've then got, if a boss is unhappy with somebody's performance because the boundaries haven't been established, you're both seeing things through different lens.
Yes.
You know, you then have potential issues of harassment or discipline. So somebody could be dismissed or they could resign. Yeah. So all of these things, when there's no boundaries, you know, you've got two individuals seeing things in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that causes lots of problems in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And so who do you think is responsible for setting those boundaries? The company, the individual? Where does it come from?
Well, great question. Personally, again, I think that company leaders should start to create the environment where people can talk about these things at work.
Yeah.
You know, a staff survey, a stress risk assessment, so anything is a good way to begin, because you can take a temperature check and learn an awful lot about how staff are feeling about the company, their job, and their own well-being. Yeah. So I think it's company responsibility to lead the way in changing the culture. Yes. But it should be informed by discussion, consultation with staff, I think.
Yeah. And so what might that look like then? So what kind of things can employers start doing?
Oh, wow. Gosh.
I'm sorry, Eric, I'm really
I'm on a roll.
Is that one? Let's make it count.
Well, you know, what managers could do is you can start the conversation. You know, we talk about team meetings. When you have a team meeting, you know, you can talk about the importance of about establishing boundaries, about you know, as a manager, you can model and you can say, look, guys, when we finish at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever it is, I'm not expecting you to work into the evening. Yeah. You know, that's you and your family time. Or if you do want to work flexibly, make sure you take plenty of breaks. You know, you can have those conversations very easily in a team meeting. You can even do a bit of training if you know, appropriate on ways that people might do that better. So I think if the managers set the tone, that will help enormously. Yeah. You know, you can give staff a bit more confidence about expressing when their boundary, you know, when they feel that the boundary is being crossed, when they feel like it's getting too much, yeah, to have the confidence to speak up. There's also a sense of employees can be more self-aware. So employers can help employees to manage their time better. That, you know, if you're getting frustrated because, you know, there's too much noise or others, too many interruptions, or people are contacting you at home too much, then you can block out periods of time where you can, yeah, you know, concentrate. I mean, these are all solutions that I suspect if you know, a team got together, these are the sorts of things that people would say. You know, you can send your voice messages to, you know, send to voicemail. You can have lots of little strategies that, yeah, and sometimes it's just little things, but those little things can build up. There's lots of different little things. Yeah. They build up and make a whole working life so much better. Yeah. And again, you know, and I've probably said it already, really, that bit about saying, look, you know, your family life is important and we respect that. Yeah. So yes, we want you to be flexible. We want you to be all of these things, but we also want to acknowledge that you have a life outside work, and we will help you to make sure that you can manage the two.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I think that's probably what I'd have to say about that. You know.
And so do you think employees then should take some responsibility for those boundaries?
Yeah, I think I would. You know, I said there's a lot of things. Managers can initiate the conversation, they can, yeah, start that process, they can enable it to happen. But once they've enabled it, then the mantle then passes to the employee, yeah, to make sure that they make as best use of that as they can. Yeah. You know, and if they're struggling, then they have, you know, to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, absolutely, you know, let me just throw one back at you now, if you like. You know, just out of curiosity, really, what advice might you give to anyone who wants to sort of reassess or create a boundary?
Okay, so usually when I'm talking to members of staff, when I do my workshops about creating boundaries, I always say to them that one of the best things that you can do is really identify a situation that's creating that feeling of anxiousness or making you feel a bit stressful, or you feel that it's become a little bit weak, the boundary has. Because then it gives you an opportunity to look at, you know, what is it that's not working for me? And then looking at the limitations. So then once you've got a better understanding of what that boundary was and how it's been compromised, then you have an opportunity to look at it and say, well, okay, how am I going to put it back into play in a way that works for me? Yeah. You know, as we're talking about the work context, it could be just as something as simple as having an alarm on your phone at 4:45 to go off as a reminder that this is the time I need to start packing up my work stuff. You know, it can be just as something as simple as that. And I think you mentioned it already, that, you know, it can be all these simple little strategies. It doesn't have to be big, full-blown things to do. Communication. So once you've identified what boundary works best for you, you know, making sure you communicate that to other people in the team, because they're not mind readers. You might take your lunch break at 12, but actually they prefer to take their lunch at 2. You know, so it's all about being prepared to communicate that to people around you. And one of the things I do sort of emphasize is that help you focus your communication, it's better to look at what you can do rather than what you're not prepared to do. So it might be between 12 and 1, I'll be taking lunch. So please, could you book any meetings after 1? Or between 9 and 10 is when I do my admin. So please call me after 10. So you're being very clear about what it is. And that's because the brain doesn't respond to, it doesn't respond very favorably to negatives. Think about it. So if you're in a situation where your boundary is starting to feel a little blurred, because you have a desire to please somebody, or there's been an urgent request come through, you know, before saying yes, particularly if you feel like you're being put on the spot, just give yourself a bit of time. You know, so can I just check with my diary? I'm about to go into a meeting. Can I call you afterwards? And that's a great one, I think.
Yeah,
because,
I'm taking note.
Because then it puts the responsibility on an external factor that you have no control over. You know, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm about to go into a meeting. Can I call you afterwards? When's the best time to contact you? And then it gives you that time to work out, is this a boundary I'm prepared to compromise on or be flexible at this point in time? The no muscle. So I call it that. So what that basically means, it's a small and mighty word, but it can be really difficult for some people, and I understand that. And part of understanding is also understanding that is also recognizing that the discomfort is a result of a neural pathway not existing in the brain. Okay. And so in order for us to get good at saying no to people, we have to do it, we have to then rehearse it, and then we have to embed it. And actually practicing saying no without providing an explanation is a real challenge.
Wow.
Okay, but what you can do, like I said, that can feel really abrupt, and it can feel like you're disengaging from a conversation. So what you can again do is say, no, I'm not able to do that. However, I am available on. So what you're doing again is you are evidencing and showing that you're able to do, you're able to support them if you want to. And again, that's the other key thing, but doing it on your time. And sticking to a routine, you know, creating a routine, it's so much easier to maintain boundaries because again, the brain likes shortcuts, which is why you'll notice you will always have a shower and brush your teeth and get changed in exactly the same order. Because the brain likes shortcuts, right? You will always have your breakfast, so you will always do it in the same order. When you have your breakfast, what time you have your showers, roughly will always be in the same order. Might be at different times, the brain likes shortcuts. So, you know, doing that. But in terms of work, and I think you've already touched upon it, being prepared to block out times. One of the companies I worked with, a small company, they actually just created a color code. And so it was, you know, deep work was blue. So what we call, you know, inflow work, where people were working deeply on a task for an hour and a half. Admin work was something like yellow. Green work was open for conversation and free for calls. And red meant in a meeting. So they'd created a color code that was just there in their diary, you know, like a shared diary system. And again, I know you've covered this, modeling behavior. You know, if there's a work culture where everyone is practicing maintaining boundaries, then you don't feel like you're the what's it called, the rebel.
Yes.
You know, you don't feel like you're the rebel who's desperately trying to assert some control in your life. So if we're all doing it, then it's seen part of the norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then protect your space. So if you're at home, you know, it could be environmental. So having a specific space where you only do remote working from there, so it doesn't overtake the whole home. Physically, you know, getting up every hour, taking a 5-minute stretch, all the kind of things you would do if you were at work. You'd be working, then you think, oh, I need a cup of tea, I'll get up and go make one, or oh, I need to go get some water, I'll go over to the kitchen and get some. Just all of these things, you know, doing that. And I think mental agility is really important, and one that again that I talk to a lot to businesses about is because there will always be exceptional circumstances where we will be asking each other to be a bit more flexible about our boundaries, and just understanding that you are part of a team as well. And as much as you might be struggling because you've had that frantic call to say your kids puked all over themselves and you need to come and collect them, which has happened to me once. And then, you know, to know that your colleagues are going to be there to support you, to help you do that, which might mean flexibly, you can't take your lunch break at 12.
Yes.
You take it at 1 instead. So having that mental agility, but also feeling confident that that courtesy will be returned.
Yeah.
That you're not being hard done by.
Yeah, and there's that other bit. Just you saying all of this just made me think of an example that I had in a workplace where you sometimes forget about the end user, the customer. So
Yes.
if in a team you're busy all asserting your boundaries and you're all putting these controls in place, you still have to think about, you know, if you have a client, a customer, what's their experience of you asserting your boundaries? Are they going to get a good service still?
Absolutely.
And it's that sort of idea that, yes, these, you know, as individuals, it's important that we have our boundaries, but we also are a team and we're also delivering a service. So we've got to kind of make them all work together.
Yeah. And, you know, kind of, I mean, I know this is a real 80s description, but we are cogs, aren't we, at the end of the day in that sense? Because if the cogs aren't joined up and working together smoothly, then the team isn't going to function. And so I think that mental agility is really important, to know that you can rely on your peers and your peers can rely on you. But again, it's about having that awareness that this isn't, you know, this isn't about breaching those or compromising those boundaries on a regular basis. Because then that's when you need to go back to the drawing board and maybe look at why it's not working.
Yeah.
It's more about, there's an exception. My colleague is clearly under a difficult situation. What can I do to support them? So those are the kind of things I tend to cover with people when I talk to them about, you know, having those boundaries and putting them into place.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd say, I suppose, unlike some of the other web chats this week, you know, the conversation we've just been having is showing that there's a sort of a joint responsibility, isn't there? It's not all about the employer needing to do X and the employer needing to do Y.
No,
this is very much a sense of, you know, we're talking about health and well-being, and it's not one-sided. Employers have a responsibility and a duty of care, but so does the employee. So, you know, it's two-sided to make this work. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's all I would say.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything else to say, really. I don't know about yourself, Erica. You think we've got anything?
No, I think that's about it.
So,
yeah, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Do you want to say some final words?
Well, just to say that obviously with this subject matter, there aren't any links or anything that I'll be putting into the comment section. But obviously, if you are struggling with asserting your boundaries and you're struggling to regain that control, then obviously please do get in touch with me. Or if you're looking for some HR advice and some fantastic input, then Erica is definitely your HR consultant to go to. But just to say thank you, really, for joining us this week. And I think you came up with a cracker of a line, which is good mental health is for life and not just for a week. And it should be your way of life. You know?
Yes.
I really like that. So I
like that one.
I do. I might be borrowing that. If you want to learn anything more about what we do as a service providers, then please do get in touch. And yeah, thank you very much. Erica,
thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, it has. It's been really good fun.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.